Get underway. Thank you all for rising early this morning and joining us here in our all-white Naugahyde living room. My name is Aaron Porter. I'm editorial director for IBEX. Before we get started, let's, if everyone can silence phones, and that means us as well.
That's a good idea.
And this is the IBEX industry panel discussion, which we've been doing every year for, I don't know, I think the last 4 or 5 years. This is avoiding contradictions in technology. So anyone who's not interested in avoiding contradictions, please show yourself out. For anyone who was at last year's panel discussion, the carbon conundrum, you'll know that our intent here with this format is sort of have a lively conversation among knowledgeable industry players about the subject that's, we choose a subject that's sort of challenging to the boat building trade. And the problem of contradictions in technology or contradictory technologies on boats bubbled up to the surface during a series of advisory committee meetings that we have in January. And accounts of flawed control systems, glitchy CAN bus operations, boats less than 5 years old that would have winches reverse directions and touch screens that refuse to respond to a touch. And it pushed us to focus on the role of tech in boat building. The global appetite for and reliance on tech really is ubiquitous now. It touches us all the time, permeates all the economic sectors, and confoundingly, its delivery on many promises of automation, convenience, and responsive consistency comes hand in hand with frequent compromises in standards of reliability and rapid obsolescence. How many times have you had to reboot Windows last week? How many times has your car fed you erroneous error messages? How frequently does the card reader fail in its task? And as an editor, how often do I not retrieve the item from the cloud storage that I thought I put there? The scarce and largely, these are pretty much low-stake annoyances that manifest. There's not a real risk in most of these elements to physical well-being. We're not in serious peril. But boating is kind of different. Boating includes a lot of high-stake dynamic scenarios in which we've come to rely on tech. But clawing your way off the leeward shore is no time for a winch to fail. Running an inlet is no time for your steering system to falter. And traditionally, you points to an understanding, an expectation of robustness, reliability, and even redundancy in the materials and technologies that we build into a boat. That tradition increasingly has sort of come under risk as new marine technology hews to standards of consumer electronics sector, not the tradition of marine-grade components. And you can track that general trend by seeing how many components producers and builders are introducing new models at consumer electronics shows, not IBEX in Fort Lauderdale and Miami and Met's trade. It's a change that has certainly been happening in the last decade. This is an example of very successful standard consumer electronics. and you can expect it to last 3 to 5 years at the outside. And you can expect it to be plagued with glitches and bugs along the way. Conversely, there's this. The average recreational boat has a projected lifespan of up to 40 years. These divergent realities and expectations mean the potential for contradictory technologies to be designed and built into new vessels has never been higher. And for a manufacturing sector with an admirable and intact reputation for longevity, there's a real risk of disappointing the boating public if we get it wrong. So future-proofing new models by avoiding those contradictions is a goal we need to keep in mind at every step, from the design and building of the boats, to selection of new technologies, systems or structures that we adopt, and the significant service sector that keeps boats reliably operating and updated through decades of use, the multiple refits, repowers, and restorations. So to help us navigate this reality, we've assembled a representative panel of industry veterans, share their thoughts, the accumulated experience, and the risks and solutions and challenges of keeping things evolving, the quickly evolving technology on board current in an industry defined by vessels that last for decades, not years. I'd like to call on my colleague Ben Stein to introduce the panel and to get us moving.
Good morning. As Aaron mentioned, I'm Ben Stein, editor of Panvo, a marine technology-focused blog. We have assembled a panel this morning that attempts to address and represent the life cycle of the average recreational craft, from design to manufacture of critical systems to then supporting those systems once they have made it into the field. So with that, we have this morning with us Wynn Willard, president of Ray Hunt Design, a naval architecture firm, Jens Bering, who is the VP of Marine Sales for Volvo Penta North America, Philip Sweeney, who is here representing Furuno as their Gulf and River sales manager, and Max Stein, the founder, and I should mention no relation, the founder and owner of Max Marine Electronics. For those who may not, I think probably most of us are familiar with naval architecture and Furuno and Volvo. If you are not familiar with Max Marine Electronics, they are a marketplace, a seller of mostly used electronics. Max will delve further into what he does, but they serve a great need in the industry to potentially keep high technology systems, in some cases aging high technology systems, alive and operating on boats. So we will start by asking each of these representatives of the industry how they address the potential contradictions in their individual area of expertise and in performing their daily functions, to just give us a little bit about what that looks like for their area of expertise. And with that, I think, Wynn, if you wouldn't mind first introducing yourself, discussing a little bit of what you do, and then how these things weigh on you.
Well, Ray Hunt Design, we design a range of boats, commercial and recreational, occasional military craft. So it's, and once upon a time we used to actually design sailboats, but that's kind of gone away in the US of A. So we have quite a broad portfolio that we do. Speaking of sailboats and going way back, we used to get a design brief from a sailboat manufacturer that would tell us exactly how much fiberglass in poundage they wanted to put into a model, and how much we were allowed for ballast, and how much they were going to spend on sails and rigging. So we designed to a pretty tight standard. Now, I don't see that much anymore today in our work. We design for a lot of manufacturers. They give us a brief, and we sort of stay within that brief without a lot of consideration for the future. It's now. It's the next model that they want for the marketplace. The future will take care of itself, often, is the attitude, I guess. On the commercial side, our customers, who would be pilots or ferry operators or any number of possible commercial applications, they want their boats to last for a long time. I mean, it's so important to them, and they want extreme reliability. And so we take that, and that's very important to them. They're going to want a diesel engine to last 25,000 hours. And they don't want to, even though we would provide good access to maintain that engine or pull that engine out and put another one in, they expect it to last a long time. On the electronics side, they don't want gimmicks. They don't want now. Many won't even accept a touch screen kind of control because it's too easy to make a mistake with a touch screen. They want a button that goes click. Then they know that they've got their machine is doing what they want it to do. Safety is, top priority and all that sort of thing. On the military side, well, that's a little different because it's a government request, often very specific, not always realistic, but very specific about what they want. There's not a lot of, except for how long things will last. That's important to a lot of these people. But they don't ask us too much about, well, if we want to change this or change that, how would we do that? How would we change the propulsion in a boat to go from, say, from diesel to electric? Or it's coming on, though. The word hybrid gets into our discussions. Before it never did. So that we may see more of that. But we're generally given a brief designed to this, and we do. Hope that describes what we do.
Great, thanks, Win.
Jens,
Thank you, Ben. Jens Bering, Volvo Penta. The accent is not from West Virginia, it's from Denmark, so close to Sweden. Very interesting, and thanks, first of all, for, I think, inviting us. I think great topic, I think, for today. At Volvo, how do we look at, call it future-proofing and so on, and it's a little bit piggybacking off what Win was saying. We have the commercial side of our business. It has to be robust, reliable, efficient, because for these operators, it's all about efficiency. They necessarily, not all of them, are about new technology. So it's on the commercial side, sometimes about finding that balance, about tried and true, that will give these operators reliability, because they look at this as an airplane. Once we're flying, it's no good to have an engine that's not working. On the leisure side, that pace is much faster, definitely much faster. So If we compartmentalize, then within Volvo Penta, we have engine design. And there we are within Penta, we are fortunate to be part of the Volvo Group. That means that we can go look in the different part bins within the Volvo Group, and we benefit from scale. Because I think in the marine industry, scale is really important because scale gives us reliability. And by that, I also mean that, what will the latest fuel technology be, injection technology be, to maximize, longevity and so on. Marine is definitely a very, very different beast than on highway. So that's where Penta come in. We marinize it really to optimize for marine use. Then we have all the surrounding components. And for me, it's a transmission. We can call it IPS, we can call it a stern drive, but it's a transmission. And therefore, now we really get specific into the marine use, and into different applications, also commercial, also leisure, and gas as well. And there, it's definitely, it takes on a little bit of a different persona because now it's very much performance oriented. We talk a lot about horsepower, but we must be reliable, and we also have to look ahead for the future. So when we now do an engine design, we will definitely take into effect, because it's part of our core value, is that also environmental care. So will it be able to run on the most available sustainable fuel that will give us the least amount of carbon footprint or CO2 emissions and so on. So those factors within Volvo, is taken into account, right from the very get-go when we do a pre-study, to get really the longevity. We can never say what's going to happen in 40 years from now, but we can certainly give it a go today, right? And we do that up front really to be as modern but as reliable as we can right up front to try to future-proof our designs.
Great. Thanks, Jens.
Phil, you want to?
Yeah, so good morning, guys. I'm Philip Sweeney. I've been part of the Furuno team for a while now. I've grown up in the marine industry and been a part of boats since I was old enough to hold a scrub brush, right? So I got the pleasure of seeing our industry go from a very analog, very rudimentary type industry to a very technically advanced industry just in my 20 years. Spent in the marine industry. So with Furuno, we experience much that's already been covered, where we build commercial products that are designed to be robust, reliable, navigate ships and cargo containers that could carry hazardous materials. So oftentimes our navigation equipment is not only critical to the crew on board, but a number of different wildlife and other things that can be harmed if we had a failure or a problem. So building products that perform at peak performance is something that we strive for. And we try not to make any compromises when we bring those products over into the leisure marine as well, right? So we try to bring our commercial, robust products into the leisure marine, so that way we have more reliable products, but that are technically advanced enough to keep up with today's current demands. So we do a lot of innovating and a lot of change, and we are also held to the fire to keep everything is current and performing at a level that is expected nowadays with as much technology that change at a rapid pace. So that's pretty much what our focus is, and keeping everybody safe and helping everybody find as many fish as possible, right?
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah.
Max.
Hello, everyone. I'm Max Stein, owner of Max Marine Electronics. say to some, I'm sort of the Bilgewater of the marine electronics industry, the used electronics guy, but I think our business really performs a very valuable service to the electronics industry. I started in 2011. That's when I started Max Spring Electronics. So I have seen the industry evolve significantly. The normalization of touchscreen displays, going from normally having a Humminbird, 5-inch monochrome fish finder on a bass boat to, 3 16-inch displays. Things have gotten bigger, they've gotten more complex, they've gotten more expensive, and generally the lifespans have become shorter as a result. My company does a lot of different things, but I'm going to focus on the used electronics. That's sort of the bread and butter of our business. So, we bring in equipment that comes off of boats that are being refit. We also take core exchanges on equipment that we sell. And it goes through a refurbishment process with our team. We have a team of about a dozen technicians, give or take a couple, at any given time. Each technician has a focus area. So we have a technician that focuses on autopilots. We have a team that focuses on Raymarine. We have a team that focuses on different brands, different products. And through that, if you have somebody working on one or a handful of things every day, full time, we start to learn about these products, and we start to really dive into them. We reverse engineer some stuff to find where problem areas are on certain products, and by doing that, we're able to keep these products alive, which not everybody has the capital to go out and refit a boat entirely, and a lot of people, maybe they're thinking about selling that boat and buying something in a year or two, and they don't want to spend all that money on a boat that they're not going to be able to recuperate that. So through reverse engineering, through 3D printing in a lot of cases, a lot of different technologies and technical capacities, we're able to keep stuff alive. One thing I will say that I've noticed is all of the manufacturers, I don't think anybody plans for obsolescence. I think when we open these things up and we see what components they're using, we see what LCDs they're using. I mean, it's all top tier stuff, but we're taking in a lot of cases consumer grade electronics products and putting them in the most extreme environment one can put electronics in, and that's going to create a lot of heat, a lot of screen failures, delamination, all the things that we see normally. So my company really focuses on identifying where those problem areas are, with specific brands or products, identifying ways to fix them, and then putting them back out in the field. The other part of what we do that is sort of relevant to this panel is we're not just trying to put an old product out there for however long it's going to last. We even with the used product, we have to future-proof the old stuff that we're putting back out, because we would be doing the industry a disservice if we didn't. So we have a lot of, I would say, proprietary processes on certain things to prevent future failures from occurring. So
great.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would assume you also, you serve as a bit of you have the advantage of hindsight in knowing what stuff has actually lasted and what hasn't. So you must be a little selective in terms of this is a good 10-year-old unit. We're going to focus on those, and some of the others maybe not so much.
Yeah, there's definitely some products that you can smash on a concrete slab and they will still go. Ironically, the products that fail the most are the ones that we seek the most, because people are looking for them because they have failed. Mm-hmm. There are some products that fail so much that we really don't mess with them, and you know. But they're generally what we deal with is a pretty reliable group of products. But as with anything, there are failures, and that's where we come in.
Thanks. Before we move on, I just want to invite all of you to take part in the conversation as well. If you have any questions, put up your hand at any time. Rachel has a microphone, and once that arrives, we'll happily take your question, and there'll probably be some time at the end as well to more specifically field calls from the audience.
Mr. Murphy.
Yes, is that working?
It is.
I've got a question. I think so far from the introductions, I can see maybe the greatest contradiction on the couch there. So, you know, across the hall in an hour, there's going to be a conversation about automated boats, ADAS systems, those kinds of things, where you've got the bridging of actuators, the physical hardware side of transmissions, thrusters, steering, all those things we expect to last for many, many years. And then we have the world-building side of automated boats. That's the sensors, the cameras, the radar, LiDAR, all the things that are going to sort of make the world that are acting on the actuators. So maybe my question goes to Jens of how do you think of the service life of the electronic sides of that and the service life of the hardware sides of that, and how those kind of live together under the pressures that Phil described of, you know, radar has to have better resolution, and there's certainly consumer pressure on advancing the electronic side all the time on quick cycles.
No small question. But very interesting. We obviously don't really get involved with like actuators, you know, and feel free to you know, I mean, continue the conversation. But from a Volvo Penta perspective, yes, we are definitely into. We have joint ventures with Garmin, but predominantly, right, we are a hardware company, you know, and we build engines, and then we have to have surrounding equipment, and where we interface, of course, into various part of the boat. We as such really don't, you know, control I think a lot of probably what you know, screens and so on, if I understand your question correctly. But they get closer to us because we are our platform, and we really try to sell a platform within Volvo Penta, right, gets broader and broader. We like to be a complete solutions provider, you know, from really prop to helm, but we're really not into the, let's call it the actuation of various functions of the vessel, as such that we control those functions of the boat today. We can, of course, in our glass cockpit, you know, if you have digital switching, but then there's really a different company behind the dashboard, right, that really does the digital switching portion of it that goes to that particular consumer, you know, whether it's an engine hatch or whatever. We of course within Volvo Penta we have sophisticated transmissions that rely on a lot of communication, and obviously part of that is, you know, we have a backbone CAN bus technology, so it of course enabled to control all those users. We have to have a robust platform, and then really it comes back to really, because if we talk about really the stern drive today, is really quite sophisticated, and so is our IPS transmission. a lot more sophisticated than you really want to know, to be honest with you. They're really two different drive lines, but they keep an eye on one another. And they keep an eye on one another. So this is the feedback loop, right? So we really do have to have sophisticated monitoring and in those transmissions, very robust components in particular, so we know where the drives are at, because the drives do many, many different things based on how you operate the boat.
Jens, I'm curious to kind of pivot from that transmission discussion, probably a little bit to wind, to understand. We have an example from about 20 years ago with the introduction of pods into recreational boating, where we saw many existing hull designs be reused, often with some modifications in order to accommodate those pods. We probably have another driveline shift coming up with hybrid propulsion, potentially through a stern drive, potentially through a pod, potentially through a traditional shaft system. But and you may perhaps have to borrow from commercial to speak to recreational, because I think you might be seeing that shift in commercial first. How are you designing for the next 30 or 40 years of propulsion technology?
Well, in a typical recreational application, i.e. fast planing boats, for the most part, it's not too difficult to accommodate outboards, inboards, pods, water jets. You can optimize a hull a little bit for each, but it's surprising you can get away with, putting outboards on the same hull that you put an IPS in. We had a design requirement for that a couple of years ago for a major manufacturer. It's going to be IPS. First, it was going to be IPS. Well, as you all know, outboards are the 500-pound gorilla in the room these days. Well, before that the first boat got built, it pivoted to be an outboard. It will also be an IPS boat. So as a designer, we can make it work both ways. There are details for each type that you'd like to have. I mean, if you put water jets are a little trickier to accommodate. They don't like to go in a straight line unless you know how to do that. So you want to modify hulls sometimes for that type of drive line. I see what's evolving here. Sort of, I can see where it's going. It's okay. You built a boat. It's got a whole bunch of electronic control systems in it, sensors, actuators, and also, I'm an electronic dunce. I mean, it's like to say I'm an analog guy in a digital age, and that's because it's hard for me to understand all of that stuff. But I can see you're going to have boats built with a bunch of electronics in them that may or may not be compatible with the next drive system that comes along. And you say, oh, well, I'd like to repower my 40-foot boat with an IPS from Mr. Volvo. Oh, yeah, okay, but that means we've got to rip out all of the control systems that are in there because they're not compatible anymore. It would be nice if the electronic boys, could have a system or systems that were compatible in some sort of longevity, right? Because that's going to be you can see the electronics becoming controlling everything, right?
So from a naval architecture perspective, even if you've tried to accommodate structural diversity for a range of different propulsion options, we're also looking at a reality where potentially, you can't design something to take care of the electronic hookup. No. That's where your remit ends.
Yeah, so stopping. I mean, we have several projects ongoing, refit projects. People asking. I mean, I think it's not always smart, but they ask you. They say they've got a boat. It needs a repower. The engines are, old, tired, worn out, whatever. Gee, maybe I'll put outboards on the boat. And you say, okay, if you really want to. But, that involves structural changes, moving equipment around because the weights and the trims are not right, That means you've got to cut the boat apart often because boats are not built they come apart very easily. No. You could do that, but that's sort of extra expense that it's hard to charge somebody for. Look, we're designing this boat so in 20 years you can repower it. No, they're not going to pay for that, right?
Yeah.
And a manufacturer's not going to want to do that. So we have a project right now, twin diesel inboards. The owners want to put outboards on the back. All right, so the twin diesels come out. We put a bracket on the back, outboards go on the back, but the transom's not strong enough to take the bracket, so we've got to reinforce the transom. How do you do that? Well, you've got to tie that all into the structure of the bottom of the boat. So the longitudinals and the bulkheads have got to move around or change around. The fuel tank, no good, so you throw that away. You put a new fuel tank in where the old engines used to be because that gives you the balance you want, et cetera, et cetera. It's a big deal. I don't think you can design a boat for that kind of, major modification. But it comes up.
Yeah.
And right now
It seems like changing the DNA on the whole vessel and when.
What's that?
It seems like changing the DNA on the whole vessel.
Right, yeah, right, yeah.
I think now more than ever, though, I mean, there used to be a hard line between this couch, right, where marine electronics manufacturers were on their side of the road and propulsion manufacturers were on the other side of the road, and it was two completely separate packages. But now more than ever, both of our engineers are sharing, have an open line of communication back and forth, and what that's developing, and again, I mentioned it earlier, is it's making the boats safer, and it's making it more user-friendly for the end consumer. And as boats have gotten larger and faster, now it is more of a time to focus on having a single place to control the vessel, having a user interface that is adaptable to everybody, whether they boat for 1 day a year or 300 days a year. Having that technology communicate back and forth in those open lines of communication between propulsion manufacturers and electronics manufacturers is only going to grow and only going to take us to places that we've never even dreamt of right now. So,
And I completely agree with that, because I think that at least if we just say the last 10 years, I think that communication, I think has, and because of the new technology, has definitely and is now benefiting, I think, the consumer a lot more than what it used to be, because there used to be a hard line, right? It had to follow the engine, but now there's a lot more flexibility, I think, up on the helm.
right.
Because of I think, some of the data that's available, say, from the engine into many different display manufacturers. Mm-hmm. So I think as a customer, I think you have greater flexibility. And when you mentioned the commercial operators, right, they're stuck on Furuno, for example, and there's other, they're stuck on something else, so and then there are certain things, us as engine manufacturers, we cannot share and should not share, right? If we do dynamic positioning system, you don't want that risk, So therefore we then have maybe a standalone Volvo display, but it's a great way how to really we can
right.
segue from, within the platforms.
Yeah, and I think the line though is ever merging, and I think that we're coming together better now than ever in the past with technology and where we're headed. So I look forward to see where we end up for sure.
I think I think first of all, electronics probably in this discussion have a reasonably well-earned reputation as the short-lived portion of this, of the global systems in the boat. Furuno also has a well-earned reputation for being the longest-lived of that group, and I'm curious if Philip, you can talk through part of what begins to end Furuno's ability to keep that stuff alive. And I think that will give us a natural segue to Max discussing kind of where he picks up and where the secondary market can pick up when the primary has to end?
Sure. So life cycle in marine electronics is very similar to life cycle in consumer electronics. So we can literally only support a product for as long as the parts that it takes to build that product are still found in consumer products as well. Like Max mentioned earlier, oftentimes there is, LCDs or processors and things that are found in an MFD or a peripheral device that could be found in your microwave or in your dish, your washing machine or whatever. And as the consumer demand for that specific small part that is a needed piece to build that device goes away or is upgraded to new technology in other fields of electronics, then it becomes impossible to continue to support that product. At some point, we have to look at how we can either re-engineer and use what's currently available, or sometimes we have to have what I refer to as a revolutionary change, where we are forced to move forward in technology and completely reinvent the wheel. And oftentimes when that happens, what we end up with is a really magnificent piece of infrastructure to build the boat around. And I think that's where a lot of consumers are headed nowadays. They pick their propulsion, and then the second thing they pick is their electronics, right? So it's very important that we provide a product that we have put as much forethought into being able to support that for a long lifespan. But in certain cases, like we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years now, in unprecedented change, we've seen supply chain issues that were riddled our industry, and all different types of things. And so it's almost forced us to remain agile, even in our current production, as things phase in and out of availability and being able to adapt to it. So Furuno has always supported products for as long as humanly possible. But there is, unfortunately, the reality that we live in with the fact that if the components are just no longer made, then we can't build up from that.
I think you've got a good point that is sort of a universal point, in that the boating industry lives off of much bigger industries.
Right.
And we get sort of the leftovers.
I believe the term scavenger has been
Well, we do,
used.
essentially. Yeah, we do. I remember a situation, Jens, you might speak to this better than I, but I remember some years ago, the big block gas engines, the biggest ones that General Motors made, they discontinued them because nobody wanted them anymore, gas hogs. But a bunch of boat companies said, whoa, please don't do that. We need them. And the answer came back, look, the entire marine industry uses 1 week's worth of production on our manufacturing line of these engines. We can't keep that factory going for you guys. So that's kind of the reality we live in the marine industry. We get the leftovers.
So can you describe, Max, where you pick up when Furuno has determined TSMC no longer makes that chip? Can't get it.
One thing I want to say before that is, when you guys are talking, it sort of brings up a contrasting thought in my mind.
IBEX 365 is a year-round digital resource and platform for the latest industry, technology, and product news. Boat builders and other industry professionals rely on IBEX to learn about new product development and to make buying decisions. IBEX 365 expands this connection beyond the show floor.
Which is that, the boat owner wants rapidly evolving technology. They want the latest and the greatest. But, to your point, the industry is very small. There's not a lot of units being made. We're not making 1 million of each screen size MFD. So, but the engineering that goes into those is arguably relatively equal to the engineering that goes into an iPhone, albeit probably a little bit less. But nonetheless, you know, if the manufacturers are to survive, there has to be a beginning and an end to, you know, to that product. You know, manufacturers are not going to survive and not going to be able to deliver these, you know, these high-tech products to the consumer if there isn't an end, if they continue to support that product indefinitely. Certainly supply chain issues affect all of this stuff. And where we come in is, you know, sort of at the end of the road. Each manufacturer, you know, differs slightly in, you know, the length of time that they support new product, but, you know, in general, 5 to 10 years is sort of an average. And, you know, after that time, and in a lot of cases though, even within that 5 to 10 years, it is uneconomical to send a unit in for repair. It could be a unit that in the used secondary market is worth $1,500, but the manufacturer is going to charge $2,500 to repair that product because the manufacturer's, you know, cost to procure and build the components to fix, you know, a main board, for instance, are that much. So, you know, a lot of times we're dealing with product that is, you know, relatively recent for those reasons. But, you know, as far as we go, you know, we're really focused on you know, if somebody's going to buy a new product, they're going to buy a new product. And, you know, on that topic, I do think that the industry has improved in forward and backward compatibility in the electronic side. I mean, you know, going back, because even though I have only been doing this since 2011, I deal with products from the 90s, even the 80s sometimes. And, you know, back in those times, you know, a specific radar display worked with a specific transceiver, with a specific cable that had a specific pinout. It was very, very much segmented like that. And now, you know, if there's a Navnet 3D system on a boat with an old radar from 2008 and that customer wants to install the latest TZT-XL, they can do so because that radar will be compatible with those new displays. NMEA has been instrumental in that, I think, with the NEMA 2000 standard and, you know, the next gen OneNet standard, which hasn't really seen widespread adaptation. But, you know, back in the day, you had CTalk, you had RobNet with Robertson Simrad, RobNet 2. You had these proprietary communication systems, and there really wasn't any way to change, you know, we're not adapters, right? But now you have, you know, J1939 to NEMA 2000 adapters to get engine information, talking to multifunction displays, and NMEA 2000 has been around for a while now, and you know, does allow for sharing of data across, you know, all brands.
Isn't that like our, you know, computers? I mean, years ago, you were an Apple, you used an Apple. They didn't talk to Microsoft, right? Then these people got happy together, and now the computers are pretty much compatible across the board. Mm-hmm. It's got to go that way, doesn't it?
I mean, it does, but at the same time, you know, there are lines. I don't think that manufacturers are going to like offer their radar technology across the board, because then you'd have people picking and choosing, you know, and then you'd also have a lot of finger pointing when there's issues, because you know, is it the MFD, is it the radar, is it the cable to the radar, who makes what? That would not happen. Yeah. But you know, we are definitely, we work with the manufacturers to, you know, they send their sort of, I don't want to call them problem children, but they send the customers that are demanding that this product needs to be fixed. They send them to us, and we take care of them. And we do it professionally, and we warranty our products, and, you know, do all the things that really should be done selling used products in the secondary market.
But it sounds like we are looking at an improved, from your perspective, an improved environment in terms of the actual sort of interoperability of different brands and different technology, not only across brands, but to some degree through time. If we've got, especially with NMEA 2000 and following protocols, there's an understanding and expectation that those things are going to be able to speak to one another and play together well.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain things that just can't be done.
Yeah.
But definitely within a brand, there's a greater spread of compatibility amongst new product and old product, so that you don't have to fully rip out every single component that was put in the boat when it was built. If you want a touchscreen instead of a non-touchscreen, for instance. And yes, within the whole boat system, there is a trending, it's trending towards being more friendly, but there are limits to that.
Yeah, but I might not have to replace all my components at once.
Absolutely.
Which is nice. Jens, I knew we talked some in planning this, a bit that I was fascinated with, and we risk eating up a lot of time going if we went through all of it, but can you take us on a quick walk through the new product development process as you guys think about sort of the use life of the product, the service, how long will this be something you service and support, and then I think also what a little bit on the training. What do you want out in the field in terms of training for technicians and serviceability before you release a new product for prime time application?
But yeah, no problem. But if I segue in from maybe what Alex was talking about, is that, and I, pre-talk, right, I call it black box anxiety. Because I think, in the marine industry, right, we have black box anxiety, and I don't know if you are the owner of an old car, but I have some for my daughters, and when you go to the junkyard, you see exactly where the problem lies with the vehicles, because that's the components that are missing. Quite interesting, really, So it's so just piggybacking off what you just said was that and it sort of leads into our product development, but going back to 2004, when we started with the EVC platform, we have gone through many, many generations, almost 20 years of that platform. But we have now created a retrofittable version of the EVC platform where the first generation can now upgrade to almost the current one. We just flipped to a new 2.0 with EVC, but which then comes into really the question. But all those boat owners since 2003 can now get into the latest platform, so to speak. And that means you can also get into new features and benefits, right? So even though that you have an older vessel, you can upgrade, and you can upgrade to the hardware that we're using today. So that sort of segues into how do we try to then think ahead with new product development, how do we try to future-proof, our products. And there are so many things that obviously goes into it, right? And if I maybe start with let's just say maybe the fundamentals, it fuels and the sustainability. And those are tough questions right now. We have seen a lot from the automotive, right? Everything is going to shift to electric. Now you have started to see a pullback from that, right? I think we still need the diesel engine or maybe the gas engine for a while. Back to your comment, Ben, right, about, our GM's 8.1, right? We want to take it off the market. Well, there was a clear reason why that happened. Probably because our EPA man up in DC, right? That is part of what drives our new development because we have to, we are given mandates, right, to meet some specific environmental, demands on the engine. So therefore that's part of really what we have to then first of all, make sure that we can meet, and sometimes enable to meet those demands. It requires really new components. That's on the engine side. We're going to continue to strive for longevity, reliability, and part of that is, of course, also the generational stuff. We don't like to do it because it's extremely expensive. 2018, we just did a complete generational update on our D4, D6 platform. And that's strictly because of some of the components we were using, the engine control system. Those components were now out of their lifetime. So we have to do a major project, and that is expensive. It's almost like building a new engine, so to speak. And then there's the new engine development. And in new engine development today is extremely expensive. And I'm sure everyone in this room knows. I mean, and you got to be sure, right? So again, it's scale. And
you share it with other. You'll share that with other diesel manufacturers.
Exactly, and that's where today you see
because you can't afford the cost.
Right. You see some joint ventures on engine development today, without naming a lot of names, but it is really for that reason, right? It is so expensive, and it's for scale, and so on. We at Volvo have an engine platform that is used for marine only, nothing but marine.
That's unusual.
It is very unusual, exactly. So, but marine is such a unique creature, the way that able to optimize the propulsion part of it. It really is. It's necessary because transmissions and propellers and an engine RPM and horsepower has to work in harmony. Right, and then we got to try to put it into a boat, and we like to go fast. We like maneuverability and all those things. So,
and you got to fix it, and you got to get access to it. It's totally different than an automobile. Totally different. Yeah.
So we can shoot an arrow into the future, and we do a lot of those. There's our advanced engineering is advanced, and a lot of what we of course work on today, I'm sure you can all imagine, is very much fuel related. I don't think it's any secret, right? But in addition to that, being fuel related, how do we then also take the electric portion of it into that equation? Because there's no question that's coming, and we are working on that, and we have now launched applications with hybrid. Which are great, I mean, but I don't think there's a silver bullet yet, batteries are not where they need to be yet.
We get requests occasionally. Somebody has a boat they love, and they say, well, I'd really like to make it more economical, or I'd like to make it I'd like to cruise quieter, and they've asked us to study the repower of this 40-something foot family heirloom that they've had forever. And you look at it, and it just doesn't work, electric yet. Okay, yeah, you can cruise for a couple hours, and then it's over. Does that work for you? Nah, that's not what I had in mind. It doesn't quite work yet, unfortunately.
So Jens, you mentioned that you just completed recently a redesign of the D4 and the D6. If you own, I think you said you did it in 18. Is that right? That it was in 2018?
2018, yeah. Correct. Yeah,
if you own a 2017 D6, what does that mean for you? Because you guys have done that because in part because of component age and the age of some of those design components. How long are you going to be able to keep that 2017 engine on the water? What can Volvo, you're here from Volvo, but any engine manufacturer do to keep that boat on the water? I can speak for Volvo, right? But I think that it probably, a lot of us in manufacturers are probably similar. But given that particular engine platform, I think the beauty there is that it's obviously built and designed by Volvo Penta, and we very much rely on that engine platform for the future because of our transmissions. So that means that you can upgrade
that particular engine. So you can obviously, if useful life is over, you can get a long block. That long block is compatible with the new design, which comprise of base engine and cylinder heads. The control system the same. So and however we sort of have within Penta 20 to 25 years of shelf life after the engine goes out of production. So if we think about a D4, D6, we're still manufacturing it today. And so if we look 20 years ahead now, right, now we definitely have met the 40-year span of that particular vessel, So we are getting there. But I think that's certainly one of the beauties behind that platform. And us engine manufacturers, we really love to design platforms because of the commonality, and it's a lot cheaper in the long run, because it takes a substantial amount of money to maintain the engines, and every time we do a generational change, just like our display manufacturers, right? It's we need to keep 20 years of parts before we did the generation, right? And now so it gets extremely expensive. All the part numbers that has to be maintained in the system is very expensive. So we like to do the least amount of that, but it is flat out necessary. Yeah. Then there's a whole discussion what takes on behind the engine when we talk about transmissions. And we end up a little bit in the same situation, right? Like Win talked about and Philip, if we put on an outboard transmission like a ZF or twin disc, or if it's water jet, we can't control that. It's out of our reach. And so now it becomes a little bit of a gray matter, right? So it becomes a very interesting equation, of course, in the marine industry. So it's that's where we work certainly close with our partnerships today. I think in any industry is vitally important. So we have those same discussions, right? When are you going to? Because we know the lifespan of an engine typically, and what's the lifespan of this particular model transmission? It's going to change. It certainly will, right? But we need to make sure that we can also follow that on the engine side.
Yeah. Hang on. Let's get the mic so we capture it. Thank you, Steve.
I welcome feedback from any or all of you on this question/comment. I'm in a position in the industry where I'm often the interface between the boat owner or boat buyer and the industry. So I'm seeing both sides of the discussions and conversations. And a couple of the themes that are recurring are lack of support for equipment. So I see manufacturers introducing new gear, more sophisticated, more capable, more features, but the support for that is lagging well behind the equipment. I realize that requires capital for equipment manufacturers to do that. And often the equipment manufacturer will say, oh, you got to call a dealer. Well, I call a dealer and the dealer says, did you buy this from us? No, we just have technical questions about it. We're actually on another continent, and they say, well, there's really not much we can do, or they don't have the answers. They don't have the understanding of the equipment that the manufacturer does. But to try to get to somebody at the manufacturer, unless you have a personal relationship, that's very hard to do. So boat owners get very frustrated with that, as do the people who are working on the boats, as do the boat builders, because they're trying to support the boat buyer, even though they didn't make the components that go into the boat. And the cost of ownership of all of this with the increasing sophistication. I walk the floor and I see all this electric propulsion, and it's very interesting and intriguing about where we are going with this. But I just look at it as a from the trenches guy and say, who's going to work on this stuff? Who is going to fix it? Who's going to know how to fix it? And even if you find people who can work on it, they can't talk to anybody frequently at the manufacturer to get guidance on how to do that. So I see that as a failing on the part of the equipment manufacturers to not contemplate, hey, how do we make sure people are happy with this equipment a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, because we've thought about how we're going to support them once they're out there. Again, I see new equipment being introduced, every day I get press releases and I walk this show floor and see a lot of new gear. And I don't want to be cynical, but my experience is when it's out there, there are major electrical equipment manufacturers for the marine industry that everybody here is familiar with. Try to get a phone call to any of them or an email response with a technical question with them, and it's virtually impossible, again, unless you have an in. So if you're a boat owner or even a technician or a boat builder, you're really struggling to get support. I worry that this is driving boat owners into playing golf, frankly, that they're just going to give up on it and say, it's always broken, I can't get it fixed, it's too expensive to maintain. Again, I'd be interested in all of you having sort of comment on that.
So yeah, the support side, what are you doing for technical training?
Well,
Rollout.
from a designer's point of view, I can sympathize, because when we're trying to figure out how to install this engine or whatever it might be to begin with, and we have to figure out how it's going to fit, work, connect, whatever, we need the good tech support. And honestly, we lean towards whatever manufacturer gives us that tech support, because otherwise it's too much work or it's impossible. And generally, we get good support from all engine manufacturers most of the time, but it's a big problem for them. I mean, they've got to support all this information all the time, provide drawings, provide models to us, so we can, put them in the boat, put them in the design, and know all of that. It's a lot of work, but it does need to be done. Yeah, no question.
You're so correct. I mean, it is tricky, and I think I think if we look through history, we have probably always gone through this. From certainly in the automotive industry, right? Because technology will continue to evolve, but right now it is so fast, and I think it has accelerated from really where we were at, right? I mean, for the old Boss fuel pump, and stuff like that, everyone could really make that engine run, so to speak, right? And it was pretty easy interfacing in with wind and so on. But as the complexity has now grown, absolutely. So appropriate equipment versus aspirational equipment, I think is really important, and I think, how do we keep that in check? Because it is, if the stuff doesn't talk, there's no question who's going to be the loser. It is going to be the end customer. I think there's a little bit of in our industry, but it's the fun part of our industry, and the interesting part of our industry is that we have people with a lot of money, and they sometimes demand a little bit of their it's so far out in the future, right, that it's, does it sometimes maybe make sense?
They don't seem to understand, actually, that what they want, to the extent that they want it, creates more problems for them, because they want the latest, which may be unproven. They want redundancy. They want to know that it's always going to work, or if it doesn't work, I've got a backup that will work. And yet, all of that stuff just adds to what has to be fixed, refixed, serviced, and when it doesn't work, they never leave the dock, because they don't want to leave the dock because something doesn't work, right?
It seems to me that this also...
But that's the demand of the consumer, so I don't know how you do.
To Steve's point, this comes back somewhat to the challenge of the scale of our industry. So a yard, for example, which is likely to be the place where this service begins, may employ 2 or 3 or 4, or at a big yard, 5 or 6 technicians, mechanics, and they're asked to be expert on engines, electronics, air conditioning, generators, all of these various things. That's a difficult challenge to start with. And then you layer in, by the way, there are how many engine manufacturers, each with their own proprietary systems, closed service tools, certifications required. And I think in many other industries, we answer this through specialization. You know, that there is an independent Volvo guy, but there's not necessarily in many markets enough scale for somebody to make their living as a Volvo guy or an IPS guy. You know, we have to be jacks of many trades. And when we put this panel together, we agreed that we were going to discuss the challenges and discuss some things that have worked to address these challenges, but we aren't here to tell you what the solution is, because I think if we knew that solution, none of us would be sitting here. We'd be busy peddling that to everybody. But I think, I mean, I think you're going to get violent agreement from those of us up here that it's a very real challenge, and I do think you raise a very valid point, and it is probably incumbent, you know, the manufacturers, my apologies, but the couch is easy to point at, that does need to be a part of the consideration at design and at rollout.
And I would say that as a follow-up to that, and we talked about it, right? You know, within Penta, in our design strategy and so on, is that we have to have service manuals, parts manuals, and even product training before we will release and can release a product. It is part of how we go through that gate system. And it is part of what has driven us to a platform design, as you know, Steve, with the EVC system, right? There we control everything. However, it is, and we demand a great deal of training on our technicians, a great deal. It's tough to cover every corners of the world. The beauty is that at least within what we deliver as far as a system is that whether you are in Australia, because you have been there, right, or whether you are in Wisconsin, the parts manual looks the same, the service manual looks the same, and the harnesses are the same no matter where you're at. So that's for us, it's the only right way, because now we get more automotive, and I think marine industry has to become more automotive in our approach, because then we become much more reliable for those owners. But back to, again, it's great that we have a guy like Bill Gates that's designing I don't know how big his new vessel is going to be, right, with cryogenic, hydrogen, systems on board, and now it's like, oh my, who actually now works on that, right? But it's great we have a guy that wants to go to the moon in his boat, because we will learn from that. We definitely will, right? So, but it's going to be a while before that becomes the mainstream in our
industry.
In this industry, exactly. Yeah. So, but someone needs to push, right? But it has to be then appropriate, I think, before we really get the scale in the marine industry and so on. And so, it's tough.
I would just make one recommendation for all manufacturers. Some do this, but not all. Make all the service literature available online. Some engine manufacturers, I can go to their website, I can download a technical manual and an owner's manual for any piece of any engine or generator that they sell. That can answer many questions. That can often help a technician troubleshoot a problem, help an owner understand how to use it better. But when they say you have to go to a dealer and buy it, or you have to go, in person someplace to get it, that's frustrating for boat owners. Saying, I paid a lot of money for this piece of equipment, and
you are absolutely correct, and perhaps maybe not part of what we had to talk about, but that becomes such, on the flip side, it's the financial burden of maybe the marine industry, right? Because of those technicians, the guy that signs up for some kind of a dealership to represent a manufacturer, he sends technicians to the manufacturer to get learned up, to take those courses, right? And then we give it to all the shops out in the world. And the equipment today is so sophisticated, so it's a balance act. I hear what you're saying, but boy, can it be a balance act, because a lot of our dealers say, you can't do that because our investment with you, Volvo. I say, yeah, okay, that's fair enough.
And it strikes me that we're at a position right now where we're on the cusp of a number of potential revolutionary changes, which are difficult. Will hydrogen be a thing?
Yeah.
To where will electrical propulsion shake out in terms of really based on battery potential and technology? Yeah. How do you then decide? Okay, these are. I mean, the same is true on the electronic side in terms of communications protocols. How do we anticipate from a naval architecture perspective? How do we? I was talking with Scott Smith at Boston Boat Works about their new some of their new models, offshore express cruisers, in which they're building in space, putting a little more elbow room in the engine room and machinery compartment, anticipating not specific changes, but we know we're going to need maybe some space for a hybrid option to fit in between the diesel and the shaft, and maybe more space for more batteries. How do we anticipate
mission control systems? I mean, that's a big headache right now, is on the diesel side, on the bigger diesels. We haven't encountered it on the smaller recreational diesels yet, but we will. And putting those systems in, we're working on a design right now where it's a plumbing nightmare. And we just, how big is this tank? Oh, great, well, we'll put it over here. No, you cannot put it more than so many centimeters away from the exhaust pipe. Oh, right. Oh, and it needs to be above this, and the requirements go on, and it's because it's a complicated system. You get the impression that it probably will work.
And it's also a complicated system.
But maybe not.
Consistent with the theme, not designed for marine, right? You're repurposing an automotive or an over-the-road emissions control system, most likely.
Yeah, I guess. But and some of them are, you see some manufacturer comes along with a system and it's quite compact. You say, wow, look at that. That's great. And then the other engine manufacturer's got this monstrous thing that doesn't fit. And you say, well, why is that? Well, because the small one is designed to be replaced every, 2,000 hours. Yeah. And the big one will last the 20,000 hours, the same as the engine. Mm-hmm. Now, who decided that? Well, they made a decision on this thing. But we have to cope with all this stuff and try to fit it in the boat and try to, if you've got a boat that doesn't have the space for that in the future and you go to try to make a repower, whoops.
Yes.
What do you do?
So one of the...
Those challenges are coming. Sorry.
One of the interesting things along the lines of the problem that Steve teed up is one of the promises, one of the ways that we're supposed to make this easier for the consumer for quite a while now has been telematics, right? The engine manufacturer knows things about what's happening with the engine, and now on survey you get a weird result and the engine manufacturer says, oh yeah, we see that serial number. It also potentially happens in the electronic space as well, right? I'm getting a weird thing, we have a remote capability in. To me, thus far, we've been at the base of the telematic mountain in terms of very limited penetration of those systems, some complexity from those systems, but probably not a lot of payoff yet. Probably particularly interested to hear where Volvo is on that, but also where Furuno is in terms of trying to make some of those things better through access to that data?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say that, I mean, it's I think probably the next step, where the marine industry has to grow or go. Volvo Truck has roughly 1 million connected vehicles today. It's a little bit of an easier space to have connectivity, and for us, you only have one engine. So one piece of hardware that has to communicate with Volvo. Within the marine space, we typically have between 1 and 4 engines, right? So then we have to, so the complexity grows, as you can imagine. But so we're working on that, but we have call it a simple version today, Ben, where we can actually, via the owner, we can grab engine codes today, and he can email them to us, because it's right at his fingertip. It's actually right on his telephone, and so he can. So that's step one. Step two is not far behind. Where we will now take that next step, where we can get into remote diagnostics and so on. Then it's a matter of what do you do with that, And we have learned a great deal, really, from automotive, from Volvo. And then you get into the point, now we need a call center. So without saying too much and without reading too much into it, that is now where we are inching, certainly within Penta, right, to get into that call center, to get ready for step 2. And then there for Volvo, right? We're a big company. We have learned a lot from our truck guys, right? What's behind the call center, right? So that's really what we need. We need to mature into what do we do with the monitoring of the equipment, and we have the capacity today really to now call an operator and say, you need to go into a workshop. We will display that on his engine display. I said, your turbo. You need to go have it looked at. We have that sophistication, so we soon will be there with vessels and so on, and it's. But again,
it's going to talk to me like my Volvo car does.
Yes.
It's going to, every time I turn it on, it's going to tell me to go to the service department.
My speed control system still
exactly.
doesn't work.
Again, appropriate technology, right, is really what we need to make sure that we can handle. And then you need to have the right people that can then do it on the backside. Our people needs to be more and more sophisticated all over the place, together with.
I think it's important to realize in the marine industry as a whole, no matter what vessel it is, that vessel is made up of a lot of compromise. Right? The entire vessel is made of compromise, whether it's location and placement for things, or it's the way it's designed so it can go fast or get good fuel economy, or do both. And so there's always a limiting factor of compromise. So it's extremely difficult to build a product with an objective of that product completing a certain task, and then putting it into a marine application where it will see a series of compromises on its installation and application. And then we expect technicians who have never seen the product before or the application that it's being used in to understand why it doesn't function the way that it was designed to function. So nowadays, with the technology that we have introduced into the market and the segment, there is a demand for technicians to be plumbers and electricians and mechanics, and they have to be knowledgeable of all connected systems, because as somebody who takes phone calls every day, because the thing that doesn't work says Furuno, but it's controlling XYZ component over here, it can be very misleading in how the consumer views how that product is operated and what functions it's actually completing. And because there was a series of compromises to make that vessel what it was that led the owner to buy it. We have to adapt in training. I mean, Furuno puts a user's manual right on the MFD. Do you know how many people look at it? Do you know how many times they'll pick up their phone and look at YouTube for that same video? So that was the compromise that Furuno realized and said, okay, we need more YouTube videos. We need more communication that's easier and faster to find, because no longer is looking through an owner's manual fast enough for the question that they want answered.
Meet
we
the
want
consumer
it right
where they
now.
are.
Yep. So it is, you know, and we've mentioned about generational changes, and we've mentioned about revolutionary changes. And I think that, you know, we don't always, as an industry, know what's going to happen when we make revolutionary changes. We don't know what problems we're going to encounter with the end user, not because the product fails, but because it's trying to be manipulated to be used in an application that nobody's realized it would be used in. And then, you know, there is often a finger-pointing feeling that an end user will get, but oftentimes there's literally nothing that somebody can do to support somebody else's product. So as a manufacturer, we try to build partner relationships with other OEMs and other brands. That way, when there is less finger pointing in what's going on, right? Because when we designed and built the product, discussed what compromises were going to have to be made to get that engine to work with that display, or to get that ice maker to turn on and off at a certain time, then we have the ability to know what's coming towards us, right? Because he doesn't understand or know why the radar doesn't work, and I might not understand why the DP system doesn't work. But if it all functions and shakes hands together, we have to keep this line of communication open, and then moving forward, we will know how to better train technicians and make the information that they want to find accessible in places that they want to find it.
Thank you. And I think we've, as promised, we haven't come up with an answer or a solution. Probably just a lot of questions, and the hour and a half has been exhausted, so I'm going to release you guys from your sentence up here. But I'm sure there'll be a lot of other people following up with you individually. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all for being part of a great panel discussion.
Thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.